And then we got the green light. green. That's it. Give it to them, and then when they're done, they can give it back to you.
Oh,
Then they give you back Senegal. Because it was and I'm hoping
Got all the good seats.
This meeting is being held in compliance with the Brown Act. SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person. Instructions for providing public comment have been provided in advance and are also included in the agenda packet. If a member of this body is attending remotely but is not at a location specified on the agenda, they may observe and comment as a member of the public, but may not participate in any member discussion or voting of this body. For all members participating remotely, please ensure your microphone is muted when not in use. Please state your name during deliberations and whether making a motion or offering a second. Any voting member or member of the public calling into this meeting by telephone can press *6 to mute and unmute. All telephone participants should identify themselves prior to speaking. SCAG encourages all members of the public to participate in its meetings. We are committed to holding meetings accessible to people with disabilities. For members of the public requiring ADA accommodation, please call 213-630-1410. SCAG offers free interpretation services for members of the public needing information in another language. please call 213-236-1895. The meeting will now begin.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to see if you grab your seats for me. Supervisor Wagner, you're holding up the whole show. Morning, Don. Good morning. We're going to call this meeting to order. This joint policy committee is now called to order. As a reminder, it's a body of attending remotely, but it's not at a location specified in agenda. They may observe and comment as a member of the public, but they may not participate in any member discussion or voting on this body. We're going to be led by Pledge Allegiance by Jenny this morning. Thank you.
Hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much for that. Any public comments at this point?
Good morning, Mr. President. The JPC did not receive any written public comments prior to yesterday's 5 p.m. deadline. Thank you.
Anybody in the audience that would like to speak on matters on the agenda? Seeing none, thank you. I was told that we have 147 potential members joining either in person or remotely today. So Maggie wants to do like several roll call votes today, just to take up all our time. No, but thank you. But we do have a lot of new members too. So before we begin, I want to take the moment to acknowledge all of our new policy committee members that you'll see on your screen. I don't know who's putting the screen up. This screen? I thought we had the pictures of new members. Oh, we're working on it. Here's the new members. Here we go. You'll see on the screen the list of members joining the Transportation Committee, the Community Economic and Human Development Committee, as well as our Energy and Environment Committee. On behalf of SCAG, I want to welcome all of you and look forward to working with you. We have one consent item. We have any members of the public who want to speak on the item? If not, can I entertain a motion on the consent item? We got a motion. Second. Thank you. There you go, Maggie. You get your one roll call vote here.
Can I please confirm who made the motion?
Second.
Alan.
Our Cindy. Okay.
Thank you. I do want to apologize in advance to our new members if I mispronounced your name. I'm going to be calling by membership, first CHD, then Energy and Environment, then Transportation Committee. Cindy Allen. Aye. Jesse Armendariz.
Aye.
Thank you. Wendy Bucknam.
Aye.
Tanya Doby.
Aye.
Deborah George Porada.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Ike.
Yes.
Shauna Elias. Rosa Espinosa. Wayman Furman. Martin Fuentes, Claudia Frometa, Gary Gardner,
Present.
and this is a vote for the consent calendar. I just want to confirm that is a yes. Mr. Gardner? Is that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Mike Goodsell? Mike Good, thank you. Peggy Huang,
Abstain.
Cecilia Hupp, thank you. Linda Johnson? Is that a yes for the consent for Linda Johnson? Thank you. Matt Lavere,
Yes.
Jed Liano,
Yes.
thank you. Eddie Marshall,
Yes.
Andrew Maciel,
Yes.
John Mirish,
Yes.
Joseph Moravito, Joseph Moravito,
Yes.
thank you. Suzette Mellons,
Yes.
thank you. Marisela Nava,
Yes.
Misty Perez,
Yes.
Freddie Puza,
Yes.
Nathia Rahman, Rocky Rhodes,
Yes.
Sunny Santinez,
Yes.
David Shapiro,
Yes.
Becky Shevlin,
Yes.
Mark Warnick, Aquanetta Warren,
Yes.
Jeff Wood,
Yes.
Tony Wu,
Yes.
Frank Yokoyama, Frank Zarunian. I'll now proceed with the EEC membership. Ana Beltran. Ana Beltran. Debbie Baker,
Abstain.
Art Bishop,
Yes.
Margaret Clark, Robert Copeland,
Yes.
Jenny Crosswhite,
Yes.
Ned Davis,
Yes.
Rick Dennison,
Dennison, yes.
Jesus Escobar. You. Sherry Horn,
Aye.
Joe Kalmick, Stephen Leach, Elaine Lichter,
I'm sorry, I'm not at my notice, so my vote does not count.
Elaine Lister,
I am present, but I am not at my notice location, so I cannot vote.
thank you so much. Patricia Locke Dawson, Vianney Lopez,
Yes.
Lauren Meister,
Yes.
Daniel Ramos,
Ramos, aye.
Suli Sorrow,
Aye.
Patty Sencall, Jennifer Stark,
Yes.
Ali Taj, Ali Taj, Tamala Takahashi,
Yes.
Connor Trout,
Yes.
Stephanie Virgin.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll now proceed and call on the Transportation Committee membership. Adele Andrade Stadler. Adele Andrade Stadler. Bill Becerra,
Yes.
Ryan Bayless,
Yes.
Catherine Barger, Brian Bergson, Janet Burns, Denise Delgado, Jonathan Dumitru, John Dutray, John Gabbard,
Yes.
Gaisley,
Aye.
Jason Gibbs,
Here.
is that a yes for the consent calendar for Mr. Gibbs?
Yes.
Thank you. William Go,
Yes.
Kurt Hagman, Jan Harnick,
Yes.
Laura Hernandez,
Yes.
Mike Judge,
Yes.
Fred Young,
Fred Chung, aye.
thank you. Kathleen Kelly, sorry, Trish Kelly, apologies,
Yes.
Kelly. Lauren Clayman, Lauren Clayman, Linda Krupa,
Yes.
Andrew Lara, Carlos Leon, Richard Loa,
Yes.
Clint Lowermore, Steve Manos,
Yes.
Ray Marquez,
Yes.
Marsha McLean,
Yes.
Tim McOscar, Dennis Michael, Linda Molina,
Yes.
Carol Moore, Carol Moore,
Carol Moore, present, and I for the consent calendar.
Juan Muñoz Rivera, Nigerian, Frank Navarro,
Yes.
thank you. Sharona Nazari, Nikki Perez, Gil Rebollar,
Present here, yes, and I.
thank you. Ed Reese,
Yes. Yes for Reese.
thank you. Gabriel Reyes,
Reyes, yes.
Crystal Ruiz,
Ruiz, yes.
Alisa Lay, Tim Sandoval,
Yes.
Zach Schwank, Marty Siminoff,
Yes.
Jeremy Smith, Ward Smith,
Yes.
Wes Speak, Karen Spiegel, Cynthia Sternquist,
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Butch Twining,
Abstain.
thank you. Steve Ty, Michael Vargas,
Yes.
Scott Voights, Donald Wagner,
Aye.
Colleen Wallace,
Yes.
Alan Wapner,
Yes.
Thomas Wong, Zen Wu. Mr. President, the motion for the consent calendar passes with 77 votes yes, 0 votes no, and 4 abstentions.
This is
Thank-
Dale Welty. You missed my name. I'm attending at the Wildomar site. And yes,
Also, this is Claudia Frometa from the city of Downey. I am present and I vote aye.
Thank
And
you.
Madam Clerk, this is Victoria Garcia, CEHD, President and I.
Thank you.
This is Carmen Hernandez on the Environmental Committee, and I vote aye.
Can you repeat that name, please?
Carmen Hernandez.
Mary Solorio from the city of San Fernando, and I vote aye.
Ms. Hernandez, it's my understanding you are not at a notice location.
Oh, I thought I was. Okay.
And that was for Mary Solorio.
Yes.
And Mark Henderson, CEHD. I'm not at a notice location, but I am present non-voting today.
Bob Engler in the house, voting yes.
Bob Engler.
All right.
This is Claudia from Downey. Did you record my vote?
Is this for Claudia Frometa?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
Great. That was so much fun. We're going to try to do that 3 more times today. And you wonder why I want to have RC in person. This is one of the reasons. But thank you, Claudia, for, thank you all, Maggie, for doing this. And thank, first of all, the team of SCAG, Comey, Darren, and the rest of the team for pivoting on what we're supposed to do here today. We always had the Joint Policy Committee scheduled for today. We try to do that once a year so we can share on bigger issues. And obviously the events in LA a few weeks ago really kind of brought attention up for resiliency and the fact that, you know, the areas that are affected are devastated. We're here to support them, but also the surrounding areas, the rest of the SCAG region. This is not just a 2 or 3 week event, as we'll hear today. It's a multi-year recovery event that's going to happen. It's going to take a lot of the planning and all the tools. So Comey, thank you for setting this up. Thank you for bringing in the expert panel we have today to talk about resiliency as a region. And I'm going to turn it all over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, thank you for allowing us to pivot real quickly to bring this conversation here. You know, the JPC is, you mentioned we have 147 local elected officials gathered around this conversation today. The JPC is a very powerful representation of leadership across our region. And so we are very privileged to be before you to talk about this. The Palisades and the Eaton fires in Los Angeles just weeks ago have caused some unimaginable and destruction and tragedy in our region. These events have made it clear that we are in a new era of natural disasters with events that we're used to seeing once in 100 years becoming more regular, coming 2-3 years apart. For us in planning, for us that are responsible for regional planning, this raises very important questions about how we prepare for our disasters, how we mitigate their potential damage, and as well as how we recover as quickly as we can. This is an issue that has been of concern and one that is actually an element of the work we just did in our regional plan, Connect SoCal 2024. It was centered on resilience and equity. With all of this being the top of mind due to the recent events, SCAG's role in convening this region to a conversation is what we're trying to, what we basically established today. And we've assembled a panel of experts to share their knowledge with us today. We want to say it's the beginning of a conversation. Actually, it's a continuing of a conversation, except that now we are ramping up that conversation given the recent events. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speakers. We have Dr. Lucy Jones from the Dr. Lucy Jones Center for Science and Society. With us, we have Amy Bodek. Amy Bodek is the planning director in Los Angeles County Regional Planning. We have Mr. Steve Soberov with us. He is the Chief Recovery Officer for the City of Los Angeles. He's joined by Vince Bertoni, who is the Planning Director for the City of Los Angeles. And lastly, we have Nguyen Tara Key, Executive Director of Programs at California Forward, a veteran of fire response in Northern California. The way we've set this up today is we have a panel that will address some questions. But before we get to the panel, we thought it would be ideal to have Dr. Jones sort of set the context of disasters and disaster recovery and disaster preparedness. Dr. Jones is no stranger to us at SCAG and has worked with us on numerous efforts in the past related to disaster planning. She is founder and chief scientist at the Dr. Lucy Jones Center for Science and Society, which uses science to support community resilience. She is a seismologist for the U.S. Geological, or she was a seismologist for the U.S. Geological Survey for about 33 years, where she developed methodologies for earthquake advisories as well as the Great American Shakeout Drill. I want to invite Dr. Jones to present from here and give us this context setting, and then we'll go to the panel. The panel will remain where they are, and we'll address them from that location. Dr. Jones.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be back. It's been, it's in the before times, before pandemic, that I last was working with SCAG, so it's good to be here. And, you know, I came originally talking about earthquakes, and we all see the earthquakes as the big one. I have had more than a few questions in the last month. Was this a big one? And it is probably the most expensive disaster America has seen so far. It probably won't be the biggest soon enough. And I think it's worth just looking, what do you mean by big? If your house burns down, it is a big disaster to you. We usually think of how many people are involved, which is a very funny measure because the more people are involved, the worse it seems, obviously, the fact that we have something like 12,000 families that have lost their homes across the region. And it's almost mind-boggling, right? But there's also the fact that the more people who are involved, the less emotional engagement we have. Now, Stalin was famously quoted as saying, "One death is a tragedy and a million deaths is a statistic." People stop caring when it gets too big. And actually, the psychologists have really studied that. And I'll just say that that's one of the things we need to worry about going forward. We can't turn this into statistics, right? And it is a really big one. It is not by far the biggest one we can get. I mean, I heard one previously elected official right after the fire saying, it's like a bad earthquake, except for, the earthquake has an epicenter and this is everywhere. Well, the reality is that earthquakes don't happen at epicenters. They begin at an epicenter and happen down a fault, right? And just because a seismologist or geologist has given something a different name doesn't mean it isn't a connected fault. There is a system that runs from basically the Eaton Fire. The Raymond Fault begins up there, through the Hollywood Fault, through the Santa Monica Fault, through the Malibu Fault, to the Palisades Fire. So we could easily have an earthquake that gave us both the Palisades and Eaton and everything in between. Right? So there will be a worse one at some point. Right? The other thing, of course, is that climate change is changing the discussion. I came in here a decade ago working on earthquakes, and I have since recognized that what's coming from climate change will be a lot worse than what the earthquake could do to us, and have actually shifted a lot of my work. And wildfires are becoming more common, floods are becoming more common, hurricanes are becoming stronger. All of these are real. And I think over the next decade or two, it's going to really change the way in which we as a society deal with disasters. Because we deal with them as, oh, that's going to happen sometime, but it's so far off, I don't need to deal with it now. And as they become more common, insurance isn't going to work. Insurance is paying someone else to take some of your risk. And when the risk gets really high, nobody's willing to pay for it. And that's a logical decision, but it does mean as a society, we have to find another way of managing that risk. So I just put it out there. It's also going to be happening faster than you believe. One thing about human beings, it's the last decade leaving the federal government, I got to do a lot more social science. So I've been discovering this whole wide range of research with really important things. Human beings cannot extrapolate an exponential growth curve. Right? What that means, a linear growth curve is one where it gets bigger with time. An exponential growth curve is the rate at which it gets bigger. So you do this. And we lose track of that upper part. It doesn't fit on the graph anymore. You've got to redo your scale. We're really incapable, all human beings are incapable of extrapolating that. Scientists have tools for doing it on paper, but you put them up and ask them to do it on the fly, they'll give you a steeper curve. The lay people will, but they still lose track of that. And climate change is an exponential growth curve. The rate at which we're getting hotter will get higher. Right? And so the rate at which the disasters come is going to be faster than you're expecting. I will say after Lahaina in Maui, I started saying it's only a matter of time before we see a fire jump from the San Gabriel Mountains down into the valley, which is where I live, right? I've been at Caltech my whole career. And, I said it's only a matter of time. I didn't expect it in a year. And and there's going to be another one, and they're going to be jumping out of other mountains. So what do we do about it? I think we need to better understand what the process is. And when you look at what happens in disasters, those of us who study it, and actually it's becoming more common to talk about this within government circles, we have 3 phases of the disaster cycle. And the 3 R's: resilience, response, and recovery. We're just coming out of response right now. Right? The fires are finally contained, and we all know what happens in response, and we do a good job of it. Because also emotionally, we understand firefighters, right? We fund response at a level 8 times higher than we fund prevention, right? So another R is resilience, what you do beforehand to make it so it's not so bad. Then you have response when it happens, and then recovery is bringing yourself back, right? And we often talk about recovery as getting back to what we were. We can't do that anymore. We have to come back to something that's more resilient as the cycle speeds up and the disasters become more common. So let's look at what's going on here. And some of our communities are going through response to recovery right now. Recovery is a process that will take a decade. Right? Let's really talk about coming back to where we are. Mitigation or resilience, is all the time in between. And for most of you, you aren't actually going through response and recovery. You're representing communities that didn't get hit. And for those of you, but you need to recognize it's going to come to you at one point. Every one of us in Southern California lives within 5 miles of an active fault. Whether it'll happen in your lifetime is luck of the draw or bad luck, whatever. So how do we face this? We have a lot of government agencies that are involved in this process. And I did want to just take a moment and remind you about how the process works. Fundamentally within the United States, and it's a great, we are a bottom-up disaster response. You begin with the fireman actually facing the fire. If it's beyond his capacity, he calls in for support and he hands over authority and responsibility up the chain. When the local government is overwhelmed, they go to the state. When the state's overwhelmed, they go to the feds. And each step of calling it up brings in more resources. But we still do try to do it that our fundamental authority is locally. Right? And that's a very powerful thing. I've watched what happens in Japan, for instance, that's much more top down. And especially in the response, people were waiting to be told what to do after the Kobe earthquake, and people died because of it. And then as you go through recovery, if the top has to make all the decisions, everything gets slowed down as well. And speed is really, really important. When it takes too long, you lose a lot more. You have people that don't come back. You have businesses that don't recover, and you get more permanent losses. My last decade at the U.S. Geological Survey, I led a program where we developed scenarios of big earthquakes. The first one for big disasters. We did a shakeout for earthquakes, arc storm for floods, and the tsunami scenario. In every one, business disruption costs equaled the direct losses in the disaster in the first place. So we doubled the losses from how long it took people to come back. And we probably overestimated how quickly it would get back because we didn't include many social mental functions. And that leads me to another point that's, I think, one of the most important things to know from recent research. When you look at what it takes for a community to recover, the most important thing is what's called social capital. Social capital being the value you get from your relationships with other people. And they have, social scientists find ways of measuring everything. They have ways of measuring the degree to which people are connected to other people. And that can be family. It can be your faith community. It can be, neighborhood associations. All of those are ways in which you connect to people and they help you because of it. I think we've really seen it. I mean, my experience of these fires has been from my home in Pasadena. And, I was a mile south of the evacuation zone. The way people have come together, we are seeing way more social capital being evidenced than I thought we had here in Southern California. I'm sort of worried. We're so big. How do we make these connections? And what I'm seeing in the response is a very high level of social capital that gives me a lot of hope for what's going to be happening as our disasters continue. I jumped into that and then I forgot to finish what I wanted to say about the 3 R's, which is government roles. Right? In response, the federal agency is FEMA. They get called in and they work with Cal OES, and Cal OES works with the counties. And a lot of what they do, of course, is bring in money. And their response is governed by something called the Stafford Act. So it's mandated at a federal level of how FEMA helps local governments. At 6 months, FEMA will leave. And most people don't know this. They have a defined end to their participation. And then usually what happens is the activities are handed over to HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Now, SBA is also involved with the Small Business Administration loans, wonderful things that help a wide range of businesses and organizations, repair and come back with very low interest loans. Right? But when HUD takes over, there's no longer any guiding legislation. We don't have a Stafford Act for recovery. It means that it's done ad hoc. HUD will be creating regulations for that money at that time. And it'll probably be different than what they did for the last one. We went and talked with people in Butte County that have gone through this, and they went through the campfire, figured out how to deal with HUD. Then they had the Dixie Fire, and guess what? All the rules were different because it was a different set of administrators that were in there, right? And it has to be appropriated at the time. So there is no guarantee there will be any federal support coming into the recovery process once FEMA leaves, and that will happen at 6 months. Now, there are plenty of other federal agencies involved. EPA has been really, there's an on-site coordinator that is doing the toxic cleanup, and they are doing it, at their cost. They are not imposing that on others. It's one of the great essentially insurance programs that come from the federal government. All right. That's all I'm going to say right now. I mean, I was a Fed, so I'm more aware of what they did. But there's then state agencies. There's Cal EPA that's working with the federal EPA. OES often leads much of what's going on. But when you go into recovery, there needs to be a recovery plan submitted to HUD, assuming HUD shows up, and it can be one plan. It can be many plans. I was talking with a researcher in South Carolina when they had those major floods in 2017. The state of South Carolina turned in a recovery plan. The city of Columbia turned in a recovery plan. A different city turned in a recovery plan. And they didn't actually ask for the same things. And then every one of those agencies or those jurisdictions had to bear the administrative burden of working with HUD. And do not underestimate that administrative burden. So I think as we go forward, how should you be doing recovery plans? How does LA City and LA County work together? Do you do Palisades together with Eaton, or do you do them separate? They are pretty different communities. Those are all some of the decisions that are going to need to be made soon to be able to do this well. I want to now just take some of the advice that we've come up with from previous disasters and share a bit of you. One of this, what do you do right after the disaster, which is many of us right now? And what we've seen, our strongest recommendation was create a collaborative, figure out how all the stakeholders work together. Now, we've looked at this in smaller areas with fewer stakeholders. It's going to be one of the great Southern California challenges. People need to be heard. Okay? Because one of the other things, when you're this type of disaster and it's getting worse and we see what it really can be, that makes people scared. And people don't like to be scared. So we usually try to find some way of changing our fear into another emotion, usually anger. The blame game is getting started. It will continue because it's a way to feel less at risk. You feel more in control if you're angry than if you're afraid. Right? So how do we engage the people who need to be part of this process and make people feel listened to is a really important thing that's coming in at this stage. The second one is recognizing that for the residents and for both people who've lost their houses, but a lot of the people around them as well, the disaster adjacent people, this is traumatic. And people need to process their trauma to be able to focus on going forward. See, I end up here talking all the sociology and psychology instead of seismology, but I've discovered that's what's really there when you're trying to get this to work. So degrees to which we can engage the stakeholders and help people process their trauma. And one of the ways that's been found that works is documenting the process. Being able to get people to share their stories and experiences, a way to bring people together and feel more like you're working together instead of somebody to be angry at. But there's also then, I'm now going to shift a bit from the immediate response to things that we can do beforehand for all of those of you who didn't suffer this time. But also it's where we want to recover to. And I think there is a really key concept that we get from the people who study vulnerability, is that either as you're doing recovery, if you have to, preferably beforehand, you need to ask two questions. One is recovery to what? What are we trying to bring back? Okay? We want a thriving community where the businesses are there and the people have come home and you feel your connections to people. But we also want a community that's not going to burn down the next time this happens. Right? And both of those goals are incredibly important. So how do we come back quickly enough to not lose people, but not sacrifice fire resilience? I will say, I know way more about building codes than any non-engineer should know after the last process. 2008 saw a really big change in the California fire resistance code, the building code for fire resistance. And I talked to some engineers. It sounds like it really, really has made a difference. They are doing documentation now out of these fires, trying to see what aspects have been the most effective. We'll need a few months to get that research done. But that 2008 code is a really, really big change. I asked a couple, what would you add? And I didn't get, no, we're doing really well. The one thing to add is vegetation management, which is not in the building code because it's outside the building, right? So that's something, again, to think about as you're permitting. And one of the things you can do is say, well, we'll give, I don't know, do you make the permits cheaper or a discount on your taxes for the next property tax for the next few years if you build in a more fire safe way. That would be, all of those are possible things. But know that the 2008 code, if we just rebuild to the current code, we're going to be a lot better than we were. Right? But it's more than that. It's what is then there's all the social thing, all the planning part. What do you want your community to look like? And having had that discussion before this moment, for all of those who didn't burn down this time, would make it a lot easier. The other question is recovery for whom? Now, for those of us who've just gone through it, we see who's at risk. We know where their suffering is. But for all the ones doing planning, really thinking about it, who are you trying to create the community for, is going to help you make quicker decisions, better decisions when you're faced with the knowledge that you got to write a recovery plan in the next 4 months before HUD will come in. And I'll put in one last little plug too. When we look at what is a community, small businesses are a really big part of it. And they're not one that has a really direct agency dealing with them so much. I mean, there's the SBA, get you loans. There's plenty of people that can't afford to be taking loans. They may or may not be coming back. How you plan with your small business community and how do you help them recover afterwards is another thing that you really need to think about if you want people to be staying, because people stay because of the really cool restaurant down the street or their church or their other, the communities that they're connected with. And in the end, that's what we're going to really be trying to do, is how to make sure that people don't give up on Southern California as life gets too tough. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones is going to be with us, and you'll have a chance to also address questions to her once we get through some initial questioning for the panel and panels introduced. Really appreciate the emphasis on preparedness through resilience planning is one of the things that we feel like is within our lane at SCAG to help the rest of the communities in the region work on. Tapping on social capital, that's something to also explore. With that, I want to introduce the panel again, and by that I mean they will self-introduce, and as they self-introduce, they will tell us a little bit about what they're doing, and I use the word briefly, very emphatically. They will briefly tell us what they do, who they are, and share some information about their role in wildfire recovery, in this particular case or in past history. With that, we're going to start with Amy Bodek.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me all right. I'm Amy Bodak. I am your Director of Regional Planning for the County of Los Angeles. We cover the unincorporated communities of Los Angeles County. Kind of consider ourselves the 89th city. We cover 125 communities and over 3,000 square miles of LA County. We cover the deserts, the mountains, the hills, the flatlands, the coast, and Catalina Island. So we are pretty varied in our roles. I've been with the county since 2018. And before that, I was with the lovely city of Long Beach. And my first disaster was the 2018 Woolsey fire. And we learned a lot about that swept through the Santa Monica Mountains, the most of which is in unincorporated LA County. And so we worked very closely with the city of Malibu and the county of Ventura, who also had losses in that disaster. And I will tell you, we still have a handful of folks who are still trying to rebuild. And that is, some of that is individual choice. Some of that is the insurance market. Some of that is personal choice to move and not return. And some of that is bureaucratic delay. And so what we've learned since then has really helped us set the stage for where we are today. We also got at the time a new director of Office of Emergency Management. And after the Woolsey fire, we had a huge effort to become more collaborative and more regional in our approach. And we've been through a few smaller fires since then, but we started preparing for the Eaton fire and the Palisades fire on Sunday, January 5th. So I think it was Sunday, January 5th. We all were called together as a policy committee and discussed the weather and knew that it was going to be an extreme weather event. And the state started pre-positioning firefighting equipment in Southern California. So we had those meetings on Sunday and Monday when the winds were 100 miles per hour in Eaton Canyon. And then of course the fire broke out in Eaton Canyon Monday night. I'm not sure when the Palisades one broke out, but Vince can go over that as well. So we're used to seeing fires in the Angeles National Forest, and we're used to dealing with the foothills. We were not expecting the flatlands of Altadena to be affected the way that they were. 10,000 structures alone in Altadena itself. It's in almost the entire community of Altadena. But what you have on the screen is our organizational structure for all of the task forces that we are running in collaboration with all of the jurisdictions. This only shows the cities or the jurisdictions. It does not include the state, which has been heavily involved. It does not include SCAG, which is on, to my knowledge, at least 3 subcommittees or 3 task forces with us, including long-term recovery and rebuild. So this should give you a magnitude of the level of coordination that we are actually doing for this fire. And this is not unusual for the 4 of us to be together. So I want you to know this is not the first time that we've been in meetings.
Physically.
Physically together, spiritually. Yes. Vince and I talk probably twice a day at least, and are in a bunch of meetings with the state. And when I say the state, I mean the office of the governor, the office of it's the new climate and
Climate innovation.
what is it?
Land use
And climate innovation used to be the office, the OPR, Office of Planning and Research, and now they have a new brand. And so we've been touring with them, both in the Eaton and the Palisades. The county is involved in both of those fires, unfortunately. So we are collaborating on the Eaton fire with the city of Pasadena, the city of Sierra Madre, and the state of California, and the federal government. For the Palisades fire, we are collaborating with the city of Los Angeles and the city of Malibu, as well as, of course, the state and the feds. So to answer the question of whether we're going to be doing 1 or 2 recovery plans, it really makes sense for us to do 2. They're very different events. There's a very different characteristics of the communities, but there's commonalities amongst Malibu, the county, and the Palisades. And there's commonalities that are shared between the foothill communities as well. So I think we are leaning towards 2 different recovery plans. That doesn't mean they're going to be vastly different because the needs are still the same. If you could go to the next slide. Do I have one? I have a slide related to temporary housing and rebuilding. What we've been doing and really working on is how to take the lessons learned from the Woolsey fire and make temporary housing available at a much quicker rate with all of the jurisdictions, and then how to do rebuilding at a much faster rate. In the Eaton fire, we are looking to do a physical building with all of the county departments located in probably in Altadena. That will be the permitting department or the permitting agency for all of the fire victims of Eaton. In the Palisades, we are talking to the city of LA and potentially being housed in one of their new locations that they might consider in Palisades. We already have an office in Calabasas, but for a lot of the disaster victims in the county, it's a little too far away. So we're going to be trying to relocate in Palisades to make it more convenient for them. This fire has really shown us that we can be nimble as government. It is taking an enormous amount of energy to do it, but it is absolutely possible. And I'm going to just leave you right now with a statement that my friend Tennis Wick from Sonoma County keeps sending and reminding me. And he says that it is up to us to make relentless, imperfect, bold progress. And I leave you with that. And I know that my collaborators agree with that statement. So I'll save the rest of my comments for
the
questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And we had invited Tennis Wick, but unfortunately they couldn't make it to join us today. We're going to go to Steve Soberoff, and then Vince will follow after that, and then Tara.
You know, I've watched not Amy. I've watched Lucy on TV after earthquakes. And I always said, God, that must be difficult. And your phone must be blowing up and flames coming out of it. Now I know what it's like to be Lucy Jones after an earthquake. Amy, I like to move fast. I like to move positive. I like to move with positive reinforcement. We want to get people back to where they were in safer conditions. Rethinking, reimagining, rezoning, upzoning, downzoning, overlay zoning are all important, but they have their own processes. There are people out there in, especially Altadena, that are hungry right now and that don't know where they're going to sleep right now. And there are people in all your cities that work in those areas or work in the Palisades that are really, really worried. It's my clients. I've been working with the Army Corps. I've been working with FEMA. I've been working with all the agencies. And I'm sort of disappointed in myself that you guys, the county, are ahead of me because I'm working fast. So I think we are working together. I believe that my job as a chief recovery officer is to put the train on the tracks with all the organizations so they can't come off. And the first thing we have to do, other than feed people who are hungry and find them shelter, because when someone gets forced into homelessness, 90 days later, they are a different person. Any of us. I've seen that with veterans. I've seen that in home. We can't let that happen. But once in the Palisades area, there are 150,000 truckloads of hazardous material and waste. And the Army Corps people say they've never seen anything like it. Well, Palisades has usually 150, 200 trucks rolling through it every day. Hear the number I said, 150,000. They're going to have to work 24/7. The first phase and the second phase basically are hazardous waste material. And I call it lot clearance. I mean, they call it debris removal or something. The heat was so horrendous from these fires. It melted appliances, aluminum. It melted cast iron pan that go at 2,200 degrees. It melted glass. Glass doesn't melt till 1,600 degrees. It breaks and cracks. Venus is the hottest planet in the solar system. I was going to say in the world. That's a bit dumb thing to say. The hottest planet in the solar system is 800 degrees. This was incredible heat. So we have to know, what did that do to their foundations? Well, I'll tell you, I don't care how rich you are, how think you're going to self-help and redo your lot faster than anybody else. You're categorically wrong. You got to let the Army Corps do this. You got to sign these papers and let these guys do what they do, because this is not dust to make you sneeze. My shoes are radioactive. Okay. I mean, these are hazardous materials, and they've got to get out of there. And any attitude that, oh yeah, get them out of there, but don't store them near my house, store them someplace else. It just doesn't work. This is a crisis of all of our situations. So I love these Army Corps folks. The FEMA people that I've met with, who are going day by day under the fear that they're being told that they're either stupid or their agency is going to be annihilated. These people are working so hard you wouldn't believe it. And if you ever bump into one, let them in front of you at Starbucks, buy them a cup of coffee, because they feel underappreciated and overworked. So I'm on the bus to yes, we're going to get this done. I know all these guys. There are people on the bus to no. They want to analysis paralysis this. Everybody's going to have a huge problem in that the gap of money they're going to get to rebuild their home and the cost of rebuilding that home is going to be enough to force people not to move back in. So you're going to have a generational change in who's going to be living in these communities, which is scary. So if I can help them reduce that gap by helping them find a little more money through some way, or reducing their costs by some way, change your paradigm of thinking about prefab. If they're building Ritz-Carlton hotels out of prefab, they can build a couple of homes out of prefab. If that can cut the cost in half and the time in half, some people should consider it. So I can go on and on about that, but those are my clients. I call them victims. They call them survivors. There are different situations, but everyone has their own yellow brick road to where they need to be. And some people's yellow brick road is, I need dinner tonight. And some people's yellow brick road is, I need to rebuild a $50 million house. And there's an A to Z in each of them. You can't just skip to Z, no matter who you are, who your lawyer is, whatever. You've got to do this with a process that really, really works. And my job is to get this train on the track, keep it rolling.
Thank you, Steve. Vince?
Thank you very much. Vince Bertoni, I'm the planning director for the city of Los Angeles. Just a little bit about my background. I worked in many cities in Southern California, starting in the 80s in Rancho Cucamonga. I worked in Malibu, Santa Clarita, Beverly Hills, Pasadena, and now Los Angeles. I have run their planning departments in Malibu, Santa Clarita, Pasadena, Beverly Hills, and here. Did I mention Beverly Hills? I shouldn't. If I left that out, I apologize if I did. I know we have a council member here who I remember from Beverly Hills, so sorry. Councilmember, if I forgot it. But So I planned some of your cities that you may be representing and understand some of the issues throughout the region. I also served on the board of directors of the League of California Cities at one period of time, being very active in that organization over time and understanding really this interaction and nuance of understanding the importance of how we make decisions locally, but how it impacts us regionally and state through some of my.
He's also a big brother.
Yeah, I know Steve back for over 30 years, and he got me to be a big brother through the Big Brothers of Greatest Los Angeles. So I've known Steve a long time. But the one thing that I want to just really say is I think both Amy and Steve have really set the stage very well. So I'm going to try to be brief and not go too far into it. To try to be as brief as I can. But really our goal is, we've really lost such a huge part of a community. And I think as local officials, you understand the importance of community in your day-to-day life. And there's this really great, tremendous sense of loss that we have in the Palisades. I was in Malibu for two fires, the Old Topanga fire in 1993 and the Calabasas fire in 96. So I had actually experienced being there when the fire occurred that took out. And by the way, this fire has taken out a lot of the same areas as the 93 fire in Malibu. But I've seen what that's like to have that kind of really the deep sense of loss and really the shock the first time I ever went out on a piece of property where everything burned. It is shocking what melts. There's nothing there. And it's really hard to describe the first moment you see that. And the utter sense of loss, and it wasn't even my home, right? Imagine if it's your own home. So people have been losing everything, and they're in such a visible and shocking way. So we're dealing with a lot of grief with community members, and that's kind of the frame that we have to look through the recovery from. We have to look through the recovery of the people who we serve, and how we can get them back to their home, to their business. And so that is just a really important frame of reference. Now in Los Angeles, these are preliminary numbers. So for a little bit of frame of reference, we didn't really lose anything along the beach itself in the city, within the city of LA, because that's Will Rogers State Park. There is, I think, one public building that may have been partially destroyed and then a little damage at Gladstone's. When you see the damage of the beaches, that's Malibu. That's really the beach damage that you're seeing on TV. But we lost a tremendous amount in the Palisades. I said over 5,000 homes, over 6,000 structures. We lost 6 church facilities, 10 schools, and 5 preschools that we lost. And we lost 21 commercial structures and 6 mixed-use structures. And it was so this whole sense of this community. If you I've driven through there, and whole areas are basically gone. And the interesting thing enough is, and I think as in Altadena, I think may have been mentioned, is that those weren't all, although Altadena had a lot of not the very high fire hazard severity zones, ours largely were, but those homes they're very much like I live in the very center of LA, Hancock Park. Those neighborhoods did not look very different than Hancock Park. And so it's kind of a shocking thing when you look at it. These are walkable streets where people were having these connections. So when we talk about policy of this, we're talking about policy in neighborhoods that look like where we all live in places like this, which may be different than other fires than we've had in the past. Our job through us is to try to and Amy did such a great job of the setup on what we do in planning, but really getting what we do down to just get rid of the bureaucracy. My goal is to get our process down to 0 or next to 0 in planning and really go straight into building and safety. So we have that actually for all of our single family neighborhoods. If you want to build what you had there before, plus a little bit more, there is no planning review right now. You go straight into building and safety. There's not even a planning clearance. So you go straight into building safety because we need to get people back to their homes. And so that's something that's really important. And so we need to, so I consider it almost like zero-based budgeting. If you've had to go, I've had to do that in a few cities, zero-based budgeting. I look at that as what we need to do here is let's bring it down to 0 to what we're doing and then build back in what we need to have in there. That way we get rid of all the unnecessary layers. There are very important conversations to have about how do we build in the long term. those are different conversations than we have about getting people back into their homes and their businesses. We've been working, so by the way, this isn't new for me to talk to Amy all the time. We've been collaborating since day one, since she came back as director. We talk all the time for now going on 8 years or more, and so do our staffs. And so we've always taken this approach of being as seamless as we can between the two jurisdictions. We're two separate entities, so we can't be the same. But we try our best to try to get ourselves there. So we've been spending a lot of time coordinating with the county, as well as staffing the FEMA disaster recovery centers. And we are going to be standing up a one-stop center in the Palisades, which is going to be really important for everyone. Where we bring everyone together in the agencies, and we're trying to get Amy asked, and we're doing our best to get LA County there, because it'd be great to have everyone under one roof. Because as you all know, as elected officials, many of your constituents don't know where these lines are. There is not something that they know if it's this city of LA and the county of LA. I'm sure you get that all the time. I know a lot of you get it when people want to vote for you, but they're not quite in your district or in your city or county, right? It's the same thing with who we serve, right? They don't know the boundaries. And so we really want to work as seamless as possible with them. And there's a lot more I could say, but I want to stop there because Amy and Steve did such a great job.
Okay, we'll go to Nuntaraki.
Great. Hello, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And I just want to start with a huge thank you to the colleagues here and to the work that you all do every day serving your communities, especially in these very difficult times. So thank you for all you do. I'm new in Taraki. I'm executive director of programs at an organization called California Forward. And California Forward is a statewide nonprofit that really serves as the connective tissue between the state and regions, looking to lead a movement to create resilient, sustainable, and an inclusive economy. And we recognize that anything we do on the economy has to be done in context of a changing climate. As we all know, the devastating impacts of the wildfires and other natural disasters and hazards that have affected the state have and continue to have very significant economic and fiscal impacts to individuals, to governments, and to the private sector. And so we really take the view that we cannot be doing anything on economic development and opportunity outside of the context of a changing climate. So just for context on that, and where we are, who we are as an organization. Also, just for context, prior to joining California Forward, I have served and worked in local and regional government, including working for, not in California, sadly, but the MPO in the Portland metropolitan region. I also have served in state government in California. I was appointed by Governor Brown and then Governor Newsom in the governor's office at the time of planning and research, but now the Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation, and led up our climate resilience and adaptation agenda there. So I am going to speak today a bit around kind of the state function and the state role in long-term recovery, but also offer some, perspective around the importance of regional approaches around long-term recovery. Before I do that, I just want to start with a quick orientation to the state's kind of long-term recovery framework. We heard from Dr. Jones around some of the, the federal infrastructure, and we've heard about local. There also is the state infrastructure that is at play and that you all are working with day in and day out. And I thought it would be helpful to kind of frame that out. The long-term recovery framework, as it is called, or disaster recovery framework, was first activated in support of recovery of the town of Paradise and Butte County after the Camp Fire in 2018. And one of the hats that I wore when I was in state service was leading one of they're called recovery support functions, because everything needs their specific name, but around community planning and capacity building. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but just sharing my perspective around the importance of having a long-term recovery framework at all levels of government, and then thinking about how they align together. So the recovery framework is California's blueprint for disaster recovery, and it's designed to, again, really coordinate efforts across state government. And it follows the national recovery framework. Dr. Jones spoke about the important role that FEMA and others about the important role that FEMA plays. HUD has an important role. EDA has an important role, US EPA. That infrastructure is also mirrored at the state level through this recovery framework. And I'll talk again about it in a little bit. But before I get into details, I wanted to frame two things. One is the motivation for creating that disaster recovery framework. It was in recognition that the extent, severity, and frequency of disasters affecting the state were continuing to grow, as we continue to see, and you all here have experienced with the wildfires, and a real recognition that responding both for response but also recovery requires an all-of-government approach, and there has to be a structure in place before an event happens to really help ideally best guide long-term recovery. So it was really in recognition of the continued strain and impacts the disasters were having to create this framework. The other thing I just wanted to frame out, and Dr. Jones did this as well, but is the typical timeline or continuum of recovery. And I think this is something for communities and individuals who have not gone through a disaster don't have full insight into. And I think it's really important that for those who have not been impacted by a community to think about this timeline as you are thinking about how to prepare your own communities in the face of a potential disaster or event. So as we all know, there's the response phase, and that is typically, 0 to 30 days, that time frame. It is the immediate response, getting a handle on the disaster. Next is the near term, and this is all in the recovery framework structure, is the near-term recovery. And near-term recovery is typically 1 to 12 months. It's about a year, depending on the extent of the recovery. That is where you are really focusing on transition from shelters and temporary housing. You're dealing with debris removal, as we heard about, environmental hazard mitigation, local and state coordination, and setting up that infrastructure. And then there's the long-term recovery phase, which goes from anywhere, depending again on severity, from 1 to 10 plus years. And it is that long-term recovery opportunity that I think, Vince, you were talking about the distinction between rebuilding now and getting people housed and back in their homes safely, and then also the long-term planning that needs to happen, learning from what's happened from the fires to think about how do you rebuild and redesign in the long term so you're not continuing to put people in harm's way, because as we know, fires will happen again. So I just think it's really helpful to understand and think about especially that transition from the near-term recovery to long-term recovery and understanding the distinction, but the connection between the two. So very high level, and I'll do this quickly because I know we'll have time to dig in more in discussion, but wanted to talk through the components of the recovery support functions that are in that long-term recovery plan. And they very much mirror the slide that you have that is already the infrastructure being set up at the county. But there's the community planning and capacity building, which is really supporting capacity building and planning initiatives for communities and for communities, and really thinking about what is the transition between near and long-term recovery. There's the economic recovery support function, so really supporting recovery for businesses and other economic assets. There's health and social services, which is really focused on the restoration of health and social services within communities. And you mentioned something that just really the importance of mental health and making sure there's the supportive mental health services for people.
What's going on? The way people are reacting. And they're willing to do really dumb, dangerous things to start help with their mourning process and drive up to these homes that are very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
Mike is not up.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the mourning process is really important, and it goes between the parents and the children. as well. But people are willing to do some really dumb things right now to start their mourning process, but they have to. They've got to go up and see those homes. Now, Google Maps flew a whole area for us a couple of days ago. And you really don't need to go up there. You can zoom in on anything and you can see a dot on the top of somebody's head on this new Google map. But we want people, we want to help them with this mourning process and move through it into the next stage, which is what to do next. Not what Z is, not what M is, but today's A, what's B, what's C? And once they see the kind of support they have, that I think that we can be helpful. But it is the mental health aspect of this is as dangerous to me as any of the physical aspects of it.
And I would just add there that, and I'll wrap this here so we can transition into conversation. There are going to be long-term and sustained mental and social health services that are going to be needed into that long-term recovery. And it is important not to forget that. We can come back to that. So then there's the housing support function, infrastructure systems, and then importantly, natural and cultural resources as well. So with that, I just want to leave, a couple considerations, and I think we'll talk through some of this too as panel, but considerations for you all as you think about this really as a regional response and recovery is to think about how you can leverage community planning and capacity specifically to think about building the support for long-term regional recovery. Just as an example, going back to the campfire and the impact on the town of Paradise, that fire didn't just impact Paradise, it impacted the entire region. Yeah. And there are receiving communities in the region who are significantly impacted. The city of Chico saw overnight the equivalent of a growth explosion that was the equivalent of 15 to 20 years of planned growth. These are regional issues. Butte County also saw significant increases in their roadway expenses from damages and wear from the hauling of waste. That is a regional issue that you all are also going to need to be thinking about.
Let me chime in there because I think that's an important segue to both Amy and Vince in the real, because that's an issue that I think you raised, and I appreciate all of your introductory remarks. They were longer than I was planning, but but they were in depth enough that you've covered some of my questions. So I'm not going to ask the questions. I really want to get to the committee, the Joint Policy Committee, to ask you questions. But I have a couple of questions, and if you could just make this brief, both Amy and Vince, with the issue of the receiving cities. Both of your agencies, LA County and the City of LA, have been great partners in housing, and you've earned the pro housing designation as a result of that. But this crisis raises a whole different level of challenge in terms of displacement, and so as people relocate to receiving cities across the region, what opportunities are you seeing around temporary and permanent housing? If you can just cover that briefly, so we can get to questions. I have another question for both Steve and Untara before we go to the committee.
Certainly, thank you. I'm going to address the Eaton fire, and then I'll let Vince address Palisades. For the Eaton fire, we know that our Eaton community fled both east and west, but the most significant receiving community was actually Glendale. So Glendale saw a huge influx, and then it really spread out through the entire San Gabriel Valley, all the way to the east, all the way to Azusa. And the temporary housing really was hotels, and Glendale and Burbank, being closest to airports, had a plethora of hotel options. Those who could not travel that far went to Pasadena, and Pasadena was very overwhelmed and gratefully opened up their convention center for mass shelter. That mass shelter is being run by Red Cross, and it is actually going to close this weekend. It's always been intended to close this weekend. So we are focusing very, very quickly on the 300 remaining people, approximately 194 households who are still in there. not all of them were homeless to begin with. There were some homeless folks, previously unhoused folks that did come and participate in the shelter activity, but a large majority of the folks who were in that mass care and shelter actually were housed and lost their homes. So we are now scrambling to deal with that influx. I'm going to ask Vince if he wants to respond on Paradise.
On Palisades?
Palisades.
Thank you. So I'll just try to be really brief. I mean, I think the real issue is Palisades, and this is more anecdotal. We don't have hard data, but it's interesting. You're mentioning what we're hearing is a lot of people actually moving down the coast, down to Santa Monica, the South Bay, is we're getting a lot of people moving temporarily from like the Santa Monica Marina, South Bay. We're getting a lot of people moving. I think that and Playa Vista, exactly. And so what we're doing is it's not necessarily coming into the city of Los Angeles, but I think it begs the question that what Comey's really addressing to is the bigger issue of housing and the housing crisis and how it really is a regional issue, right? We can't just draw the line at our borders, what you're seeing in the county and what we're seeing in the city of LA. And it's really taking this seriously. And it really gets to the point that we all need to do something about it. Because when we have a disaster, people won't necessarily be relocated into our own communities, our own homes. And we're just in knock on wood, tomorrow morning, our city council will be adopting our final ordinance for our housing element rezone. And we had a RENA target of it's great not having to describe what RENA is in this group finally. That's very refreshing, by the way. But a RENA target of 458,000 units to be built in 8 years. And to get there, we did a study to see what is realistic. And we came up with we have to rezone for over 255,000 more homes. And that is a realistic number. The actual number in the zoning will be much greater than that. So we are planning for and those will be not just something you could build through a planning process, but a lot of that will be by right, where you go straight into building and safety. And we have to be thinking of these solutions and how do we get there as a region for these? Because when we lose someone in a natural disaster, they won't stay in our community. They'll go someplace else sometimes.
Yeah, and thank you, because I think that's important, and that's a region-wide impact as we try to accommodate displacement and knowing that we're already dealing with a shortfall in housing inventory in the region. I want to go back to both Steve and Nuintara, and this has to do along the same lines. But what are some of the most valuable financial tools that we could see to support recovery and rebuilding? How can the private sector, for example, be an agency here? How do we use philanthropy if possible? And then if you would just touch on the issue of insurance, you've already raised it in different ways in your presentations. How does that feature into this approach to recovery and to the approach we need to have for recovery and rebuilding?
Well, maybe I'll start on the insurance point first here. So just for context too, after I left the state, I went and worked for an insurance company around insurance and climate related work as well. So I think there are two things to really think about in terms of the insurance crisis and insurance kind of market volatility that is affecting the entire state. So again, it is not just a local or regional, it is a statewide issue. And there are many factors that are playing into that. And I think there's two things. One, we cannot look to insurance as the funding source for resilience investment. I think there's some kind of misunderstanding or thinking that insurance is somehow going to play that role. What insurance will do is serve as a very important economic incentive to recognize investments that are made public and private in risk reduction. And insurance is a useful tool also in thinking about how to value and quantify actual reductions in risk. And so I think insurance, as we're thinking about strategies to kind of stabilize and deal with insurance market volatility that is affecting everybody across the state, it has to be coupled with sustained investment in risk reduction, because we have to start actually reducing underlying risk as the core strategy on insurance market stabilization. The second piece, though, is in this moment in time, there is a need for stabilization of the market that may require public investment or additional public backstop in terms of guarantees for the FAIR Plan or other structures. But the thing I think we should all keep in our mind is we need to make sure as we're setting up those backstops, we're not just transferring who holds that risk to public balance sheets, which means we can't just say cities, counties, the state are going to keep holding that risk, because we will end up in a place where we cannot afford that. There is some interesting research that has come out of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York that is looking at, if your goal is price stabilization and price only in insurance market stabilization, there are real links to municipal bankruptcies. So I just think as we're having conversations around the insurance market, we need to really make sure we're not just transferring those costs to public balance sheets, and we need to be thinking about it in tandem.
Steve. I'd like to just reiterate that everybody's going to have a gap. And that gap is going to either force people to sell. I hope they don't sell right away, because that's dumb, because we're going to be doing a lot of improvements and they'll be able to do their plans, get their permits, and hold on for a year and sell for triple. I don't like people being taken advantage of. But that gap is either once they get their construction costs and once they know what their insurance is. And I don't know about you, but when I deal with my insurance company, I've had the same people for years and I know their kids. I get somebody to help me, because they ain't going to offer first what they're going to wind up offering. And I think that people need to try and get as much from their insurance company to fill the gap as possible. As far as the banks go, just frankly disappointed in the first offer of 90 days. And then on the 120th day, you pay back the 90 days. It's like silly. Shame on you. It's got to be over a year, and it's got to get tacked onto the back of your mortgage, because your new home is going to be worth a lot more. And so I hope, and I think that the governor working on it and everybody else, but just be aware, the bank roundtable didn't come up with anything that was meaningful. The third is other types of funds that may be available to fill the gap that we don't know about. We all went to school, and I know when I went to college, I mean, I didn't get a full scholarship, but I looked through this booklet of about 200 different things, and sure, I picked 3 out. And I think that there are pots of money in the federal government, maybe in the state government, that may be able to assist in reducing the gap. The cities, look at their budget, look at the county budget. I mean, everything's upside down. The economics of city operations is upside down. So thinking that they've got all this money stashed aside to fill in the gap, we have to be creative. I think philanthropy can play a role. I don't know about in filling the gap, but there's a whole lot of people that need to start doing their plans that don't have the money to start doing their plans. And that's a very easy thing for philanthropy to offer. I get calls from people. Hey, we just had a concert last night. I raised $75 million. Irving Azoff tells me, because we don't know what to do with the money. I do. Irving, there's people hungry. There's people that need houses. There's people that need to do plans. So I think that those are important issues. The other thing I wanted to mention about is a flaw I have and a request that I have. I have a flaw. You can almost call it a disease. It's called empty mailbox syndrome. I answer every goddamn thing that comes to me. I shouldn't, okay? But I'm laid back, nervous, high anxiety. But I do. So when you see me or whenever you talk to me, just do me a favor. Don't ask me how I am. Hey, how are you? I don't want to, because I don't even know. I'm operating on adrenaline here. let's just get right to let's get right to the heart of things. We all have stuff to do, and I want to help. This is very big and very important. To show the America that things can work when we work together. And America hasn't been working together in the last, I don't want to give you a specific start date, but which I could, but we don't have any choice now. And I think that we feel we're all on the same page here, is how do we get this done?
Well, I know we have a lot of pent-up questions in the group, and I have my questions, but I'm going to pass it over back to Mr. President and see if he can orchestrate the question.
Thank you. It's got to be 100 questions, but I'm going to hopefully set the stage. And part of SCAG's resilience package or view. So you're all focused on recovery and taking care of the residents, which it's a Herculean job. And I want to thank all of you for your efforts in there. I'm putting on my other hat, since many is, the 190 cities we represent in the area, is lessons learned as well, both from practicality side that I hope you could do in parallel. So we're not waiting 5 years to get an after action report. There's things that our cities can do right now if you live in an area that's higher vulnerability. We heard about insurance rates. I have cities in my district that very high insurance rates because they have a lot of brush in the back. Okay, I talked to my fire departments. Well, you need to set some standards, clean some stuff up. Well, it costs money. You just talked about how, broke the cities are. Well, should we have special districts for having preparedness when you have a wet year and 2 years later it's dry? Should we be working on things like I went with my county fire agency that was doing a planned burn in South Coast Air Quality says you can't do today because it's a bad health day. So, policies and planning and those type of things, I hope you get from your boots on the ground that can possibly help us as local planners for our cities and counties to put a little bit of prevention and not just wait for the next disaster to come. And I think there'll be a lot of finger pointing later, which I'm not here to do, but what are lessons learned on a larger scale that we can put in practicality? Like I said, in my home city back when I was mayor, we had CFDs for parks. Well, you can have CFDs for brush removal, I guess. There's different things we could do. So hopefully that could be working through SCAG and some of this policy things. So not necessarily a response, but I'm hoping you guys can do that.
On my way here, I spoke with Joe Edmonston, who runs the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, who lost his home, who happens to be a phenomenal guy who's put together for the state of California the acquisition of more land than anyone. He is just a phenomenal guy. I said, Joe, people talk about this not happening again. The only way for it not to happen again is if there's not the kind of fuel that's up there. And what Joe said to me is, absolutely. But you find me one person that's willing to allow a controlled burn in any area near where they live. And he goes, and I'll call him a saint, because everybody wants controlled burns away from them. Everybody wants a park in their neighborhood, but not across the street from their house. Everybody wants all the toxic stuff. I'm not supposed to use that word. The hazardous materials removed and stored, but just not near where I am. And so he just doesn't feel it's at all possible to keep the fuel down, and that's scary.
Yeah, we're going to have to do some major changes. Hopefully, we can learn from this. John?
Thanks so much. And first, I want to thank Vince Bertoni for remembering his days in Beverly Hills. I'm sure you have some good Rod Wood quotes to share with us. And also note that there's a Beverly Hills connection with Steve Sobroff, whose mother had a store, which we loved and we missed, called Shackstead. I did want to just quickly say
Were you current on your invoices with my mom?
With Shackstead, yes. The best towels ever. And also, if you like prefab houses, you may want to look. I've been trying for years to get them to come here. IKEA, who everyone loves for furniture, and Skanska, two Swedish companies, have a company that makes prefab modular housing called Boklok. And it is everything from townhouses to single family homes. I think they go up to 6 stories. it's beautiful. It's that Scandinavian quality, and it's the sort of thing that doesn't look junky. And it would be something, maybe they'll listen to you if you call them and say they should come here. Anyway, my question was actually for Dr. Jones, and I wanted to thank her for her discussion of exponential growth. And I wonder if we shouldn't be on a larger level in terms of avoidance, in terms of future planning, if we shouldn't be somehow focusing on that in a critical way, because exponential growth also does mean exponential increase in vulnerability and in some cases exponential problems. How can we, in a society that is focused on growth, deal with exponential growth, which is actually one of the major causes of these problems? Thank you.
Yeah, remember it, I guess, is the best. You've got to include it in the planning, that however much you're thinking that climate change is increasing the risk, you're underestimating it. And I think we've reached the point that we can't put it off anymore. We have to come up with more comprehensive plans. I mean, as Tara's talking about, we have to have more comprehensive look that there's a lot of things that we can't just ramp up what we've done. We've got to change the model. And, we're going to have wildlands, right? We aren't, going to build up through the San Gabriel Mountains. And actually, chaparral doesn't respond to controlled burns. It's only a conifer forest thing, right? And you can't take out all the plants on the mountain. We're going to have to come up with a different approach now that they're burning at the rate at which they're burning. And presumably that's you guys. You've got to think in a different terms. It's fundamental model change, I think, has to happen.
So I'm going to also tag on to that. And I think that the state really did lead the way in the last RENA cycle. And again, you all know what that means. By dictating that we needed to pull our growth away from the hinterlands and the wild urban interface. And so that is why the rezonings are occurring in the urban cores and in your cities and in our unincorporated counties that are in the basin. And so there's a reason to that. And I know it's very difficult from a city jurisdictional perspective, but that is what needs to happen. In December, the county downzoned its hillsides above Altadena while it was upzoning the commercial corridors of Altadena as part of its housing element rezoning, with the support of SCAG through grants that we got from SCAG to do those rezonings. But to answer a question that was also posed earlier, we need to ask you, as the smaller jurisdictions, to get together with your neighbors and figure out how to do climate resilient district financing. It's similar to the old redevelopment tax increment financing, but it's specific for climate resiliency. And if you don't have a large enough jurisdiction, you can band together as groups in your regional associations to look at potential projects for that. We are considering a climate resilient district for Altadena. There were a lot of infrastructure needs that need to be resolved in that long-term recovery. And so we are already thinking about that long-term recovery and how to provide master plans of trees. For example, oak trees are amazingly resilient, palm trees are not. So those are the small things that you can do, but the larger ones are look at a climate resilient district to see if you can utilize that as a funding source that's not going to be impactful or harmful to your jurisdiction. That might be an answer for you.
Can I just add on one very quickly to that, to the tie into insurance, because we've just launched a resilience district incubator through our organization to look at supporting jurisdictions do exactly what you just said. And the tie-in on insurance is, and this is what we need to test, is if a jurisdiction can make sustained investment in risk reduction through sustained, revenue streams, like through a resilience district, the idea is if we can get insurers at the table from the beginning, we can think about how to have those risk reduction benefits actually brought into their modeling and underwriting. And so just a note, if people are interested in that, and we'd love to, connect and figure out how we bring these pieces together. there as well.
No, that's a great, that's a
I see
pragmatic
you
idea.
have eight questions.
I have a
pending.
lot more, and so we're gonna keep the questions
And
down to
we're-
30 seconds and responses down to a minute if I can. Otherwise, not everyone's gonna be able to do anything. Laura?
Thank you, and thank you to our panelists for their presentation. I'll keep this as brief as I can, but I'll preface it by
30
saying I am
seconds.
a former emergency manager, over 30 years of emergency management experience, starting with the city of Los Angeles, city of Santa Monica, county of Ventura. And I don't have a question. I just want to state in this venue here where we have a number of elected officials, pay attention to your emergency manager. These concepts are not new. You have plans in your community, open them up, look at them. They do address response, recovery, and resiliency. So many, over the years, I've seen us dismiss our emergency managers, lay them off, eliminate the positions, rest at the bottom of a totem pole. Please bring them up. Bring them up on the totem pole, listen to them, have them come do presentations at your council, board of supervisors meetings. They are just as important as police and fire.
Thank you.
And the questions that Lucy Jones posed here for us in her discussion are good examples of questions you can take for a 5-minute, 10-minute tabletop exercise among your department heads and your fellow council and board of supervisor members. You need to have these discussions. The time to plan for disaster isn't when it breaks out on that very evening. You need to start planning ahead of time and take those blue sky moments to do so. Thank you.
We're getting really short on time. Sharona?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. I had an opportunity to go to the area, and I share deep sympathy for anyone that was affected by it. It really was a tragic space. I think that educating the community is going to be extremely important. There's only 180 days from the day of the devastation that people will be able to get federal relief funding. And so all cities that were contributing to helping with the fires should know about that, educating the community about federal support as well as FEMA and private insurance, and how all of those necessarily do not overlap and one cancels the other out. In addition to that, I think that this is something that affects all of our communities because environmentally, we're all being impacted. You mentioned several times that there are toxic materials that we need to be aware of. And I just want to know what kind of actions are being taken to protect our water system, because as the water percolates, it's raining now. A lot of those hazardous materials are going into our water system. What are we doing about that to help local and surrounding environments, as well as the air quality that deeply concerns us? And finally, one last question, quick. Our schools are being flooded right now with a lot of students coming in, and we want to be able to assist all of them and welcome all of them. There isn't funding for it. We don't have the teachers in place. We don't have the structure in place to take care of that. So I'd like to know what is being done to address those issues, because as I said, this is something that affects all of us.
Yeah, and let me just maybe oversee that, because there's gonna be a lot of questions from neighboring jurisdictions, even areas not far away that's gonna be receiving the waste and debris. Is there a central location where we can send our official questions from our cities to LA County, LA City, to have some of those things in more depth answer? Because we're not gonna figure them all out today.
Amy, quickly.
I'm going to say lacountyrecovers.com or org, excuse me. That's not right. lacounty.gov is the place to go, and there's a recovery page. But to quickly answer your questions, we were aware of the first rainstorm coming in a week ago and laid out with Cal OES as help specific storm mitigation programs that would prevent that runoff from occurring. And that is actually one of the reasons that a lot of the EPA removal work is being done in Altadena first, because it is right at the tip of the mountain. So that's the quick answer. We can get into more details later.
And we could serve to collate some of these questions
Yeah, that'd be good.
and get some answers that we can send out to all of you later on.
Otherwise, I'm gonna have a very unhappy wife.
Do you have any specific questions for Steve Soberoff? Because he has to take off.
Yeah, we got Don?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. And you and I both serve on AQMD. I was on a panel yesterday unrelated to environmental disasters and was complaining about some rules that they were proposing. And so the question was, okay, Wagner, what should SCAG be, AQMD be doing? And my answer was advocating for responsible forest management, responsible wildlife management, responsible defensible spaces, responsible water usage, so that we don't have fires like we're talking about today, that in 2 weeks undo literally 10 years, according to reports I've seen, of clean air efforts. So my question to the panel as emergency staff responsible for this, are you advocating for those sorts of policies that will help provide the defensible spaces and lessen the potential for disasters? If not, why not? And if you are, what sort of responses are you getting from the electeds that sit atop your various different organizations?
Yes, no eucalyptus trees. We are, as people rebuild, if they're going to get in the express lane and get their permits faster and their inspections faster, they're not going over 110%. They're going to harden their landscape around and they're going to use tomorrow's materials today. If they don't, they ain't in the express lane. And if you ain't in the express lane, you got to go through the normal process, which will take, I think, years. But the answer to your question is, yeah.
That's rebuilding. What are you doing?
But the regional planning, I think that's
what are
probably
you
what
doing on planning and a forward-looking basis?
Yeah. Resilience planning.
You're not going to like this, but
Probably not.
yeah, I mean, my professor in college started the ULI. Okay, I'm on every board, USC, UCLA, every think tank and everything else. Okay, but I can get people back in these houses now. And there can be future overlays and future hardenings and everything else. But we're doing the best we can without holding things up, waiting for a 15-year solution. And I'm sorry that's the answer, but we're going lot by lot, utility by utility, neighborhood by neighborhood. But the global stuff, we the research we need. It's not for.
I would just offer that we as a nonprofit organization are advocating for the types of, not as a public entity, but as an organization advocating for the types of things that you were talking about at the statewide level in terms of thinking about how do we get the right investment, sustained investment to the long-term resilience and risk reductions that are needed. But we also importantly need to think about, this was one of the questions, how do we drive economic alignment? Because it's not going to just be public dollars and it's not just going to be the state general fund, even though we need state general fund to go towards that and align. So just putting out that we are advocating for those types of things. And
I think to the supervisor's point, regional planning needs to be thinking ahead of what's going to happen. And so I think most of that's in policy right now. However, I mean, maybe one statistic to bring to mind is 95% of the housing stock in our region is pre-1990. And so until you actually renew those houses, you might not be able to get to some of these policies that are already looking forward in most of your plans.
I think the short answer is the county adopted a climate action plan for the unincorporated county. I believe the Los Angeles city did the same. If you don't have a climate action plan in your jurisdiction, you're behind.
Yeah.
And that's the short answer. This is not going to stop. And so you need to actually have your policies in place and then actually put implementation programs to those policies. And that's the only way it's going to work regionally.
One question I have of all of you guys, because people are asking me all the time, I don't want to build a house that's not insurable. So, even if I go to the new codes, is there going to be something in 6 months that I need to do? And how can I get that information now And so anything that you can get to us to advise the individual homeowners who are going to be rebuilding in these areas to incorporate in their plans now, or you can get to the architects.
Zone
et
zero.
cetera.
It's zone zero landscaping, whether or not you're in a very high fire hazard severity zone or not.
Yeah.
That is the answer that we can give you today.
Yeah. Well,
And that's from the state fire code.
But they're surrounding.
yeah. But what about materials? Are there new materials that need to go into? People should rethink what their roofing is, rethink what the sides of their houses. I don't know.
From what I've heard from the people who study this, the 2008 code is a really huge improvement, and that there wasn't much they wanted to add on top of that. This is from academic researchers looking at the fire position. So the problem is 95% of your property is before 1995. Building codes aren't retroactive.
The other thing I want to say, sort of to Vince, nobody knows where their lot line is.
Yeah.
Who's next?
We're gonna
on the
move on.
quest-
We're gonna move on. I will say that I think one of the points brought up today is bringing the insurance companies who are going to be insuring our homes to the table, discuss things. Maybe that's a role SCAG could do is bring it forward. With
And
that.
I should just note, this is, like I said, this is the beginning conversation. Each one of your committees is going to address this issue along the lines of your subject matter. So we're going to come back to you in the next couple of months with more topics related to this, specific to your committee. So it's an ongoing conversation.
Tanya.
Thank you very much. So that was a glorious and very micro presentation. I appreciate the facets of it that I very well understood. I am a more macro person by nature, so I don't necessarily have questions. And if you perceive it as a question, feel free to stick a pin in it until you can bring the answer to us all. One of the comments that I have is, how does this information get explained simply enough so that we can get agreement across the different stakeholders that we need it? Because I hear people saying, well, they just want to do this and they just don't understand. As an elected official, I've had to learn how to speak the language of my hearer. So that's one suggestion that I would make. The next is, what are our bite-sized possibilities? What I've learned also is too much information lends to a shutdown. It becomes too overwhelming. There comes a point where you don't hear it anymore because there's nothing that I can do. How do we take it from up here and bring it down so that each person involved can do something? The next thing is, how do you make it palatable for everyone, including our youth? I had conversations with my children, and they were able to at least have a compassion so that as they grow up, it won't be a, oh, that happened to you, so sorry, but it didn't happen to me. That's something that we also have to be bearing in mind. Let's not waste a tragedy. That's how you waste it. We don't learn anything from it. Last thing is, how can each city reasonably help? Like, I know I'm Orange County. Y'all probably wouldn't have guessed that, but I'm Orange County, and my city manager went to I think they were called control centers, or they were like the centers where everybody was gathering to help. And my city manager went and volunteered. So there has to be something that everybody can do, because that's how you get the cohesion across California that'll spread across the nation. And those are my points.
Thank you. Aquanetta.
Thank you all.
Hi, Aquanetta. Oh, I'm sorry. Aquanetta Warren from City of Fontana, San Bernardino County, and I echo your words 100%. What I would add to is that the trusted people or trusted voice that people are hearing too much of is these lawyers. And so all the advertisements on television, all the radio announcements have people very confused. I have a few friends that were impacted, and I talked to them. I really wish there was a process, and it may already exist, that we have people that understand not all the system, but some of what they're going through as it relates to what they're going to have to do to recover their lives, like we do with the homeless. We give them a case manager. That case manager stays with them for a year and a half to make sure the process they're going through to rebuild their lives works. That's what needs to happen in this particular sphere. I think that works. We have all these retired people from city and county and agencies throughout the state and the nation. I'm sure people with training would not mind assisting these poor people with what they're going through right now, at least advocating for them when they have to come and do their plans, advocating for them with their insurance company. If we don't provide that resource, and it may already be set up, and I don't know, the trusted voice that they hear on the radio and television will become that voice. And litigation will go on for years, and these people will still not get what they need.
Thank you, Karen?
I'll make it really short. We need to continue to share information. We had some fires. I mean, nothing as devastating as Los Angeles, but all of our counties, cities have had fires. We had 23,500 acres. People don't even know this in October, September, October, the airport fire. Thank you, Orange County.
It's regional coordination.
Look it up if you guys don't know. Anyway, and we had 160 structures gone. And so we've all had those. And we need to take the information. In fact, I've been texting with my EMD and my fire chief for Riverside County, telling them about this meeting. And this is recorded, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm going to have them watch it because we need to be sharing this information. That's the only thing I want to say is we can't just take this, put it in our pocket and leave it. You have to share some of the tidbits that you're getting from today. That's how we learn.
For the record, it was an accident.
Thank you. Jeff, what?
Thank you. I just, I think this, we've had a great presentation, but we've only had about 20 minutes to discuss it. And I think a working group would really be good. I know you said we're going to address it in future committees, but this is so important. I think the level of expertise among council members. I know you mentioned emergency management. I worked for Cal OES as a deputy regional administrator. I was on the governing board of the California Earthquake Authority. We have attorneys, contractors, so many experts in this room that I feel like we're not tapping into it. And I think a working group that could be able to, we hear this and then we go back and the next event will happen. It'll be an earthquake and we'll get together and say, oh, we really should plan. And then we forget about it. I just think it's too important. And I think that we should really utilize the talents we have among our colleagues here in this room and in our cities, because there's a lot of talent. And I think it would be beneficial.
Thanks, Jeff. Lauren?
Thank you. My day job, I'm a program manager for Emergency Network Los Angeles, which is the VOAD for Los Angeles County. And a VOAD is activated by the city and by the county. We recently had a wildfire resource hub in Pasadena with California VOAD and Kaiser Permanente. They hosted the event. We served maybe 400 people a day. Serving means financial assistance, over $7 million over those 6 days. Items like air purifiers and cleanup kits, emotional and spiritual care. But there were thousands that were not served because there weren't enough hours in the day. We found people were emotionally devastated as well as financially devastated. People are underinsured or they're not insured at all. We have AFN, access functional needs issues, especially language limited. And now we're in a situation where we have a political climate where those people are afraid to go to get the resources because they are afraid that they are going to be arrested and deported. So it's bigger than economic development and it's bigger than housing. There's just so much going on all at once. We do have our long-term resource arm is LARCRO, which is Los Angeles Region Community Recovery Organization. It's a lot of letters and stuff. And they came out of the Woolsey fire. That's when that organization was formed. So they have a lot of experience. If you're looking for an organization with experience with disaster case management, especially long-term recovery. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to take one last one that's been patient online. Marcia? Marcia?
Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure you were going to be able to get to me. I just wanted to mention, hi, Vince Bertoni from Santa Clarita, your former place. But anyway, another true disaster is not only those that have been so terribly impacted by the fires being talked about today, but also the impact to many modest homeowners being subjected to insurance companies passing on their costs to existing homeowners, including those who have had their rates tripled this last year before there were even any fires, and who will be facing future unaffordable rates. So I'm just hoping that at some point we can have another joint committee get together again like this and discuss what we can do as a body, what all of us can do as a body to address this issue for not only existing disaster relief right now, but into the future for people who are not going to be able to stay in their homes. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I'm hoping that we will have another meeting soon, and this item can be placed on the agenda.
Thank you, Marcia. So it's right before 12. He's got to cut out. First of all, thank you to our panelists. I know you got to be super busy right now. SCAG wants to be a part of whatever way we can to help plan for the recovery and the resiliency that we need for our region. I think Comey will set this up in each one of our committees, have further discussions. SCAG will be a thoroughput for here and now questions that we can send to the different the LA County, LA City, the state, as far as affected neighborhoods and surrounding areas. So we'll put that burden on us here to just be the conduit for information going forward. And this is a larger, bigger person. These are the people in this room that needs to plan for that next wildfire, the next flood, and all the rest of it. You have staff to do it. I think as elected leaders, we need to send the resources to our teams and our cities and our counties to let them know, just like we heard about the emergency planning, that's important. But I think together we can work on some suggestions and some maybe legislative and policy changes we could do to the state. I love some ideas from the panelists about ways to fund some resiliency, in some different areas. So we'll continue to explore that at SCAG and try to take a leadership role in that and keep working with our resiliency package. And anything else, Comey, before we break?
No, I just want to again thank the panel. I think that we could have gone 2 days talking about this, and there's a lot of pent up conversation that still needs to be had, and we'll be tapping into them anyway. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned.